Hi, I'm Gordon Raquel from Filmmaker U. At Filmmaker U, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at filmmakeru.com or, of course, follow us on Instagram at filmmaker_u. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week I'm joined by sound designer Jeremy Bloom, whose work includes Hot White Heist, Deep Sky, and a hologram at South by Southwest celebrating Netflix's Three Body Problem, just to name a few. Welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Hey, thanks for having me. Pleasure.
Okay, can you describe or explain this hologram at South by Southwest? What was it?
Yeah.
How did it work?
Yeah, I just wrapped that up. And it was in downtown Austin at South by Southwest, a 50-foot tall hologram, kind of teasing the release of a new show called Three Body Problem that will be on Netflix. It's an amazing show. I had nothing to do with the show. Amazing sound designer Paula Fairfield sound designed the show, but I got to work on this hologram that was it's cool. My first hologram. It's really fun working on new mediums and applying sound design to those new mediums and exploring all the ways that sound can elevate them.
So how do you like I guess if it's outside in sort of like an outside environment, how did you design the sound for it? Like what was the process and where does the sound come from? Because it's a hologram, but you want it to
Yeah,
feel like it's coming from the hologram.
good question. So I think my experience working on this is sound had the real power to reinforce the kind of three-dimensional depth that the hologram explored. So in the hologram, there's kind of elements rushing towards you and receding and that kind of thing. And of course, the challenge though is unlike in a traditional cinema environment where you can place speakers behind the screen, because this imagery is transparent, you can't do that. So we had to work in stereo with speakers placed besides the the projections, if you will, or the hologram, and work with that and create a particularly dynamic mix to kind of emphasize depth and localization.
Interesting. So it sounds because I mentioned also like Hot White Heist. It sounds like you're very much into not just film and television, but like multimedia. So what is it about multimedia that attracts you?
Yeah, absolutely. For me, I think for everybody who calls themselves a sound designer, they may mean something different. And for me, it's really all about making very conscious and deliberate choices to explore all the ways that sound can elevate a story further. And the really exciting part of that for me is that there are so many different mediums that work can be applied directly to. So of course there's film and TV, but really the only difference between working in film and TV versus a podcast versus a museum exhibit versus a hologram, it's at its core, it's the same. It's all about storytelling and all about thinking about the ways that sound can support that story building, build a world, and the only differences are really technical details having to do with the mediums and limitations and that kind of thing. So I think that stuff you can kind of learn, and you can learn how to speak with the film people. You can learn how to speak with podcast people and learn the advantages and the challenges of each of those mediums. But at its core, it's all the same. And I really, I find it really interesting to explore all those mediums, and I learn a ton from each of them and get to apply them to each other. So it just keeps things fresh for me, really.
Hmm.
Keeps it interesting.
I got into sound designing at a point when things were just developing. I was really fascinated by the idea that dialogue, effects, and music were all components of the soundtrack to a film, which had never occurred to me before. What gets me excited is coming up with sound ideas that do match picture, but also is not just the equivalent of what you're seeing on screen. I'm Eugene Garrity, and this is my course on sound design.
One, it would keep you challenged, right? Like
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, in the
as opposed
best
to
kind of way. Yeah, I'm always
yeah, it's
learning.
creatively challenged, I guess.
Mhm.
Now I do have to ask, I was going through your bio, and it talks about the range of sounds that you've designed, and it includes things like sea monkey laughter,
Yeah.
subliminal satanic snake dialogue.
Yeah.
What's the craziest sound you've had to design?
Oh man. It's funny. I go through periods of time where like similar stuff reoccurs. So like just this year, I had to sound design the Big Bang twice in the period of like 2 months, just by
Mhm.
coincidence. And like this year, I've been doing like a lot of like orbiting planetary stuff, and in previous years, like I've been like every one after another, every project was underwater. But in terms of the craziest. Um, Man, I don't know. Like at this hologram has like a giant eyeball, and that was cool. And
Yeah.
weirdly, that was also the second eyeball thing I designed this year. Um, it's a mix, every project is different. And every all the projects I really enjoy have one or two challenging elements like that. So I don't have a specific answer for you. Um, but for every project I try to make what I do unique, and their particular challenges to solve, um,
Mhm.
that I challenge myself to do in new ways.
Well, and you mentioned the sort of orbital space stuff, and you did Deep Sky,
Uh-huh.
which is on the James telescope, or the James Webb telescope.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Um, so in some of those, like I think about the stuff we're seeing from Webb's telescope. We don't even, it's nothing we've ever seen before in humanity.
Yep.
So how do you figure out what the sounds are? Like, how did you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Deep Sky is an IMAX film, and it plays mainly in science centers and planetariums around the country. It's all about the James Webb Space Telescope. So for those of you who don't know, the James Webb Space Telescope is kind of like the next generation of the Hubble Space Telescope. It's a telescope. It's orbiting above our planet, and it looks deep, deep, deep into our universe, and therefore, in a way, back through time, because light travels relatively slowly through the universe. So if you look further and further, you're actually seeing further and further back in time. And it presented a unique and very exciting challenge for me as a sound designer, which is the classic conundrum. Okay, we have a movie. It takes place entirely, for the most part, in space. Space doesn't have sound. How do we grapple with that paradox, and how can sound elevate the story? And so I think back, so many different sound designers have approached that in different ways. Um, Whether you think of the kind of like high tech fantasy of Star Trek, of Star Wars, the tactility of gravity in terms of thinking about, okay, there's no air in space for sound to transmit through, but sound still does transmit through solid materials. And so thinking about that tactility. But for Deep Sky, the thing I was inspired by, I actually went to, by coincidence, I went to a lecture from the chief scientist of the James Webb Space Telescope. And I was really inspired by how ultimately the beauty of the images that the telescope is capturing is um, it's reflecting the kind of materiality of all the elements and the dust and the ice and the fire that exists in space. And so I thought sound would be a really good way, to sort of create a bridge of relatability to these materials. So if when we see them, we hear sounds that are just like a little bit familiar to us and trigger us subconsciously, I feel like the imagery can become more relatable in terms of like, okay, this is depicting an icy environment. This is depicting the hottest, fieriest environment you can imagine. This is depicting a black hole, which is the heaviest thing in the universe. And so I tried to challenge myself to record elements that were of those familiar materials that all of us encounter every day during our lives, but using kind of extended techniques and alternative experimental recording techniques to capture them. So they're also not immediately familiar. They're relatable. We connect with them subconsciously, but it's not just the sound of water. It's not just the sound of a campfire or something like that. So examples, I looked into burning all sorts of semi-exotic materials. So whether that's sourcing pre-existing recordings of things like magnesium burning, or in the comfort of my own studio, recording like wet objects coming into contact with candle wax, burning hair. I think I burned some horse hair and some of my own hair for the project. Or for something like the heaviness of a black hole, I don't have it on me right now, but I took a really big frame drum and I bought all these different kinds of spinning tops like this, because the two things about a black hole is that they rotate and they're really heavy. And so I recorded the sound of the friction of all sorts of tops spinning on a drum head and then slowed it down like 200, 400%. So it's really deep and bassy, to get something that it's not an everyday sound, but it's relatable. It relates to sounds of spinning, and because it's so low, it feels really, really heavy. So those kinds of experiments.
So you talked also though, like, so just so I understand, um, we're talking about experiments in with like getting the sounds, but not like the recording like techniques of how you're setting up mics, or is that also included in that?
They're combined. Like in some cases, I took everyday kind of pedestrian objects, so like things like toys, but recorded them with techniques that capture elements of the sound that aren't immediately audible to us, whether that's very high frequency sound or very low frequency sound. Or in other cases, I used very, very standard recording techniques. At times, even like something as simple as a little hand recorder, like a Sony A10, but recording materials that are maybe more exotic that we don't hear in everyday life. So it can go either
Yeah.
direction.
Interesting. Now I have to ask then, what was your favorite sound that you had to create for the James Webb Telescope?
I'd say it's twofold. Like one is just the kind of sonic landscapes of these beautiful photos, and finding ways to depict them that like depicts their materiality, as I said, but also verges in a musical direction. So it's somewhere on a spectrum between very literal sound design, but also very expressionist and very kind of musical to also capture the emotional energy of those scenes. But then there was another scene that was just the launch sequence of the rocket that carried the telescope to space. And that was very exciting because, Robert Hine, the supervising sound editor, and Roberto Fernandez and we treated it like almost like a car chase sequence. Like there are all these perspective cuts and thinking about all the ways to make it as exciting as possible by giving every possible perspective on this rocket launching, was a very exciting sequence to work on.
Now it was in IMAX, so
Yeah.
like, did you do anything special to create a unique sound? Because IMAX is iconic for being massive and it's a
Yeah,
massive screen. So how did that impact you in your design?
absolutely. And one of the amazing things about this movie is not only was it in IMAX, but it was created for IMAX, commissioned by IMAX. And so oftentimes when we work on films, we're dealing with the challenge of thinking about, okay, this film is going to play in a movie theater, but it's also going to play on somebody's iPhone, and figuring out how to create the best experience for every medium. In the case of Deep Sky, we were creating it for the canvas of an IMAX theater, which meant that we didn't need to kind of make any of those compromises in a very exciting way. And so I would describe IMAX, it's more as the broadest, most flexible canvas that you can paint on, in that the sound isn't limited to just the screen or just left and right. You can place sound anywhere in the theater. And so obviously for a movie that takes place in space, where there's no up and no down and no left and no right, that's a really exciting canvas to be able to paint on. So we were able to expand these soundscapes so they envelop the whole, not only do they envelop the whole audience, but they kind of can give the audience a little bit of a sensation of weightlessness or lack of gravity by moving around the audience in a way that isn't something that we might experience on Earth, and that the audience is stationary, but these elements can kind of undulate and move around, so it feels like we're floating.
Probably one of the smartest things I've ever done for my career. It gave me all the tools that I needed to be able to jump into a new career.
getting myself into a mindset, thinking like an editor, and being around people that I can talk to on that level was really invaluable to me.
A lot of the things that I learned from that class, I still think about.
I loved the classroom. I loved the computer stations. We built a sense of community.
And it also instills a lot of confidence in you to take that and go out into the world.
After I took the class, I felt very prepared to take the next step.
I owe Manhattan Workshop the career that I have right now.
Things have been going great, and I really have the Manhattan Workshop to thank for that.
So you get to play with surround sound then a lot.
Well, yeah, not only surround sound, but
Yeah.
like vertical, and
Yeah.
to an extreme. Yeah.
Wow. Now, I would love to know, I know we didn't mention it in the opening, but you also worked on No Hard Feelings.
Yep.
But I would love to know, what was your involvement with that? What would you do with that film?
Sure. So, No Hard Feelings is a rom-com, and I worked on that film with the amazing team at Harbor, which is a post-production studio here in New York City. Again, with Robert Hine, who's somebody who I like to collaborate with a lot. He's really been around the block, and he's amazing sound person who's worked with everybody you can imagine. And so I was part of a large team that contributed to that film. I worked mainly on the tail end of the film, on the sound effects of the film. If you're familiar with the film, towards the tail end of the film, when everything comes to a head, there is sort of like quite a bit of action involving a car and a beach and that kind of thing. And so I contributed to that along with a whole bunch of other people.
So what is like, because I think about, like, as a sound designer, you're sort of overseeing everything and you're getting to, decide how this is going to sound. Whereas in something like No Hard Feelings, you're a part of a team. So how does that
Yeah.
change your approach?
Yeah, so that's the structure of a sound team on a film can take so many different it can look very, very different depending on the needs of the film, and especially the timeline of the film, and of course the budget. So I've worked on films from everything where I am the sole person responsible for all the post-production sound on the film, from the sound effects edit to supervising the process and thinking about the logistics of that, to cleaning up the dialogue and working on the dialogue edit, working extensively on the music edit and how it aligns with picture, and then mixing the film with the director and getting it to a place where everything's balanced and it fulfills the needs of the director. So there's a version of working on your film sound it's a kind of a one-person show, and then that can expand kind of exponentially. So on some films that I work on, I might be contributing to just the sound effects, or even just specific types of sound effects, along with somebody or a group of people who are working on the dialogue, a person who's just managing the entire process, a sound designer or a supervising sound editor who can kind of overlap at times, who's like interfacing with the director and learning the creative needs of the film, and a mixer who puts everything together at the end. And I really, really enjoy that team-based approach, because having more sets of ears on a film means that there are more opportunities that are recognized, and we all can give each other feedback on our work. And for me, I'm a person, I came out of the theater, I started in the theater, and so I really like that kind of collaborative mentality. And yeah, but there are so many different ways to work.
You've worked in so many different sound environments. Is there one that you haven't had a chance to play with that you're interested in
Yes,
trying?
yeah, definitely. So I do a lot of work in exhibit design and museum exhibits, and the thing that I really like about that is that it combines so much of the other disciplines I work in. It often contains visual media like a film. It like in theater, you can put speakers anywhere in the room and create a kind of architectural sense of a soundscape. Often the museums I'm working on have a kind of journalistic element, so I have to take into consideration sort of historical accuracy and journalistic integrity, like I would working on a podcast or a nonfiction podcast or a documentary. And I really like the way all those combine. The thing that I'm excited about that I have not worked on just yet is there are a number of emerging sound systems that allow you to place sounds not only around an audience, but also they kind of magically beam sound to the middle of a room. And so the Sphere, the Madison Square Garden Sphere in Las Vegas, is a prime example. They have a soundscape like this, and I'm very, very excited to hopefully soon, at some point, I'm hoping have an opportunity to have a project where that type of technology could really serve what we're doing. And it's amazing in that you can walk across a room and suddenly you're in a kind of cloud of sound, and then you emerge out of it, and it's magical. It's very cool.
Have you gone to the Sphere yet and tried it out?
I have not. I have heard the technology that's behind it, but I have not been there yet. No.
So my last question for you is, what would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Yeah, right now, I'm watching it's gone through a number of networks, but the show Alone, the reality show Alone.
Okay.
And I just think it's in a way like one of the most of any TV show I've consumed. Like I feel like my mom can watch it and enjoy it, my grandfather can watch it and enjoy it, I watch it, and it's just like at its core, it's about surviving and the joy of having food when you're hungry and
Yeah.
staying warm and these core things that we can all relate to. And I also really appreciate that it's kind of the production of it is very bare bones, and these people who are tasked with surviving in the wilderness are charged with filming themselves, and they do a wonderful job at it. So I think I really appreciate that show, and it's a nice way to unwind at the end of the day.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.